So welcome to video 5 in Doom and Logic, where we're going to start to take a look at the business sectors. To kick this video off, I want to take a look at GDP first. Gross domestic product is the market value of all final goods and services produced within a country. Now when it says final product, it could be a log that's being shipped to, say, China. The primary product, of course, was the tree, but the finished product was a log. And if you want to know the equation they use for GDP, you can see it there as an equation. And written out longhand, it's GDP is the private consumption plus gross investment plus government investment plus government spending plus, in brackets, exports minus imports. Now you'll notice that I've highlighted and read the government because the government has a part to play in GDP. In other words, what the government spends makes up part of our GDP. For gross domestic product, that means the GDP measured of production regardless of the various uses of the item, but it's got to have an output. And the production can be used for immediate consumption, for investment into fixed assets or inventories. And lastly, domestic means, well, it's produced within our borders. Now that we've considered what GDP is for a second, I want to go back to my original question. Who would collapse first in New Zealand? The business sector, the banks, or the government? And in particular, we're going to take a look at the business sector today, or a part of it. The business sector is made up of three primary parts. One is exporters. That's pretty obvious what that is. The second part is business to business or internal economy. That's the economy that exists within our borders where businesses trade with each other. And sometimes within that economy we have smaller ecosystems, the likes of Auckland or Sydney, which has an economy within itself. And the last one is companies that form a hybrid of this, which is a combination of both. If we were to consider just exporters, we would see that New Zealand exporters contributed $53.5 billion to our GDP. This is an improvement of 11% since 2015. Now 58.3% of New Zealand's exports go to Asian countries and a further 15% to Oceania countries, meaning that we're exporting 74% of our products to the Oceania group. Another 11% goes to North American countries, 10% roughly to European, and there's rags and tags below that. Now given New Zealand's population is 5 million, that's roughly 38 billion of exports, which means in US dollars $7,600 for every resident in New Zealand. It's obvious that we don't live on $7,600 US dollars every year for every man, woman and child. So how is the rest of it made up? Well, it's made up by internal GDP. Before I move on to discuss internal GDP, let's consider how our exports as a percentage of our total GDP compares to other countries. So what you can see here is that exports make up nearly 48% of the German economy. Our export-driven GDP is nearly half of what Germany's in and is over half for Australia. And for North America, it's even lower again. So if exports made up 28% of our GDP, the more important question is, they did not make up 72% of our GDP, and what does? Another question is, can our exports help us to recover? Well, if we look at our top 10 exports, you'll see there that dairy, meat, milk preparation and fish makes up 49% of our exports. You would have to think that we're pretty darn efficient in these sectors, and the room for growth of them may not be enormous. On top of that, I want to point out number 6, and the probability that our wine industry may find itself with some difficulty. So back to my earlier question, can we expect an export-led recovery when our GDP is only made up of 28% of exports? Well, the World Trade Organization does not think so. So what did the World Trade Organization have to say? Well, the World Trade Organization forecast released on April the 8th predicted that world goods trade would fall somewhere between 13 and 32%. For a bit more data on that, you can refer to my first video, part 1 in the Doom and Logic series. It also said that Australia and New Zealand's exports were forecast to fall between 6.4% and 15.6% in 2020. But because of the proportion of exports that were agriculture and processed foods, that sector was expected to take a smaller hit than, say, manufactured products and services. And in particular, areas like tourism, transport and education would be hard hit. New Zealand's overall goods exports concentrated in the primary sector were actually 2% higher in March this year than March 2019, which is good news. So dairy exports were up 7%, meat exports up 10% and seafood 7%. Although forestry was down 36%. We can start to draw some conclusions from this. Primary produce is likely to improve our GDP while other areas fail, and that's because bulk protein in food is going to be more in demand in the world as other countries find it difficult to produce this cheaply and naturally. The volumes will not increase in these areas because they're already very efficient sectors, but the sale price per item probably will increase. And this leads me to say that farmers will become the highest tax group within New Zealand and Australia because they will be the highest profit groups. Now that I've touched on taxation, I want to link what taxation means in terms of GDP. So you'll remember earlier that I had a formula for GDP, and it was written out longhand as private consumption plus gross investment plus government investment and government spending. Now notice they're in red, and we add to that exports minus imports. So how does this play out? Well, if tourism drops and GDP goes down by $36 billion, as I laid out in my first video, part 1, what happens if the government spends an extra $36 billion? Wouldn't that mean that we'd have the same GDP? So what I'm saying is if the government chooses to spend $36 billion a year when the tourism sector has dropped $36 billion a year, wouldn't that give us the same equation? Well, the answer is yes. But in reality, the government is distorting the books. So let's rewrite that formula, or in particular, let's rebalance the scales. So what you can see is the government is going to spend $52 billion more. Yes, well that increases the GDP, but the exports, this is external money coming in, reduces by $36 billion. So the GDP in itself may look higher, but it's really a falsified effect. And this is why. So in this graph I've just drawn up, you can see here that we have GDP at the top trending up over time. The government also takes a proportion of GDP to help itself run the country. And you can see that they're in parallel. But we've just had a step change. And the step change has happened because of COVID-19. So GDP has gone down and it may remain flat. But the government's tax take or burn needs to increase and go up. So along with the step change down in GDP, the government has now increased its spending. And if it increases its spending, it has to increase its taxation. So you see a step up in the government's take and a convergence of the two lines. But what the government will choose to do in the fiscal stimulus is create an artificial line of a new GDP where it bridges the gap with its own spending. This has to result in a rebalancing of the scales, and ultimately those scales are probably going to be rebalanced by higher taxation for businesses. It is most likely to occur in businesses because the government will be looking for people with wealth and the unemployed will not be wealthy. So it's only going to be the productive sector that the government can look for greater rates of contribution. Okay, back to my original question. Who would collapse first in New Zealand? The business sector, the banks, or the government? Well, in part 6, we're going to break down the sectors a bit further, and we're going to also look at another effect that might occur, the effect of inflation. While I've got your attention, I want to alert you to something that we've done to help business people. If you know anyone that's having difficulty in business, then please let them know about what I'm about to say. From personal experience, I can say that it's very difficult to have a failing business, and there's a point where you need to know when to cut your hand off to save your arm. In practical terms, that means you need to restructure your business and you need to know when to do early terminations and redundancies. And what we've done is developed a tool for free for people who are having difficulty right now out of our Labour Rate resources. And you can go to the website and find those tools. In it you will find a restructure tool and a redundancy tool, and this helps you to evaluate it from economic terms. Why would you do an economic restructure? Well, I know of one company that had to go through a restructure process and was told that it would cost them $150,000 in early terminations. And what eventuated was a $600,000 bill. Now that was way over what the owners would have anticipated and caused them a lot of grief because it's not easy to get money from the bank at that point in time. That is why you need to conduct an economic restructure and to look at early terminations from an economic point of view first before you go into those negotiations, and you'll find the solution to that in our free offering. Regardless of whether you have a boom or gloom attitude towards what's happening, you would know that there is a new wave of opportunities coming, and there will be an old economy and a new economy that will emerge out of all this trouble. As I said in previous videos, I'm in the business of picking winners and losers. We will see new opportunities appear and there will be crossroads when they appear, and you should choose to position yourself at those crossroads so that you can take advantage of them. Let me make a suggestion so that you're at the crossroads in time. Go to LinkedIn and join our Labourate group. And if you really want to see where the opportunities are, you can also request to be a part of our Business Futurist group. By doing that, you'll be able to see these videos as early as possible, and you'll be able to share them with your friends and colleagues. Now, the reason for this is outside of the messages we're giving here, we're pointing people directly at the opportunities that will emerge so that we can all take advantage of those opportunities. Now, this group is a lot more select, so please just ask for an invite and we'll have a look. And as long as you're happy to comply with the intent of this group, then we're happy to have you on board. At the moment, I'm way ahead of myself, and the research is probably 3 weeks in advance of these videos. So I hope to have the next video out within a week, and at part 6 we're going to look at different business sectors and start to look how inflation will have an impact on the business sectors. I look forward to seeing you there. Don't forget to subscribe and make sure that your friends know about these videos as well. Thank you. I'm Lester Bryant.